Do you believe that even a simple supermarket can turn into a scene of chaos and surprise, almost like a horror movie? Imagine an ordinary afternoon, busy and full of routine in New York, one of the busiest cities in the world, where life pulses by the second. In this scenario, two criminals enter with the intention of robbing the establishment, believing that a quick and silent action would be enough to get away with it. But what they did not expect is that the force of nature, often forgotten or underestimated, could turn the tables in a completely unpredictable way. Stay with me until the end, because what you will discover now may surprise you in a way you never imagined. In a few minutes, this ordinary robbery turns into a scene that looks like something out of a horror movie, with twists that leave anyone jaw-dropping. When the criminals try to escape through the back of the market, something unexpected happens. When they knock over an old crate, forgotten in the warehouse, they release a gigantic swarm of enraged marimbondos. And from that moment on, everything turns into total chaos. A real apocalyptic scene that no one could have predicted. The marimbondos, normally considered only a minor threat, show their power and ferocity in a frightening and surprising way. While the robbers drop their weapons and run desperately between the shelves, the supermarket customers, frightened and frightening, watch a real battle between humans and a ruthless force of nature. What seemed to be an ordinary crime becomes a struggle for survival, with a twist that leaves everyone speechless. Have you ever experienced a situation where nature intervened unexpectedly in your daily life? This story certainly makes us reflect on how the unpredictable can be on our side at any moment. And believe me, this is just the introduction of a sequence full of emotions, suspense, and a dose of surrealism. Get ready, because what comes next will leave you even more intrigued and curious to understand how a supermarket turned into a horror movie scenario, and how the marimbondos, in a surprising way, became the real heroes of this story. And as we reflect on this story, it becomes clear how much the unexpected can arise when we least expect it. A simple robbery attempt, which seemed to have everything under control, turned into a scene that looked like something out of a horror movie, all because of that swarm of marimbondos that appeared out of nowhere. It's a powerful reminder of how nature, often underestimated, can prove ruthless and protect what it considers its own. Perhaps you have already experienced situations when something completely unpredictable changed the course of events, and if you have such a story, leave it here in the comments. Your experience can inspire others to reflect on the power of the unexpected in real life. If you enjoyed following this story, be sure to like the video and share with those who also like amazing stories. Your participation is essential for this channel to continue growing and bringing content that awakens our attention to what is most intriguing around us. In addition, subscribing to the channel is a way to show that you want to continue receiving these incredible stories and stay on top of everything that happens in this world full of surprises. Every comment, every like, helps to create an engaged community where we can exchange ideas, emotions, and experiences. So stay tuned, because what comes next promises even more thrills and revelations that will leave you wanting to know more. It was an ordinary afternoon in New York, with the typical movement of a city that never sleeps. The streets were filled with hurried people, each with their routine, their commitments, and their dreams. Inside the supermarket, the mood was one of tranquility, like a mirror of daily life that runs its course without major setbacks. Customers walked along the shelves, choosing products, talking with employees, while cash registers rang softly, setting the rhythm of an ordinary day. The routine of a supermarket comes down to small everyday actions. Someone picking up an apple, someone else choosing a packet of rice, a lady talking to the attendant about the weather. Everything seemed to be in its place, exactly as it should be. The sound of conversations, the clatter of bags, and the clink of coins created a normal soundtrack, almost like a melody of peace and security. For those who were there, everything seemed like any morning or afternoon, one of those that happen hundreds of times, without great emotions, without great surprises. Employees attended attentively, trying to maintain order while replenishing the shelves with fresh products. Customers, in turn, focused on their purchases, often distracted by their own lives, oblivious to what might come next. In this routine scenario, security seemed like something guaranteed, a certainty that is part of the daily life of such a busy city. But what many people do not realize is that at some point, the lull can turn into the most unexpected storm. And that's exactly what happened that day. Two men entered the supermarket with a posture that seemed ordinary, but that hid an entirely different intention. Armed, they moved quickly and silently, as if they were used to it. They looked calm, confident, as if they had planned every step accurately. At first it seemed like an ordinary robbery, an action that could be resolved in a few minutes, a routine that often ends with the thief taking what he wants and leaving the scene. However, what they did not imagine was that, at that very moment, a force of nature, forgotten or underestimated by many, would enter the scene and completely change the course of events. As soon as they started looking for the money at the cashier or the items of greater value, a simple action of fleeing for the funds ended up triggering a chain reaction that no one could predict. By knocking down an old crate, forgotten in the warehouse, they released a swarm of gigantic marimbondos, which stood there, quiet, waiting for their time. And this hour came exactly when they least expected it, marking the beginning of a scene that would soon become legendary. That moment of routine turned into a chaos of almost apocalyptic proportions, a battle between man and the natural force that often remains hidden, but that can emerge and alter the course of any story. The impact of that swarm of marimbondos was immediate, turning the supermarket into a real battlefield. The customers, frightened, ran in all directions while the robbers, taken by surprise, abandoned their weapons and ran desperately, trying to escape from the voracious attack. In that instant, everything became a confusion of screams, movement, and fear, in a scene that seemed like a movie nightmare, but that day it really happened. And there, in the midst of that chaos, a silent lesson revealed itself. The unpredictability of life is always lurking, ready to surprise us in ways we never imagined. The force of nature, often considered a lesser threat, showed its true power in that moment, reminding everyone that true transformation happens when we least expect it. And the impact of that day was marked in the memory of everyone who witnessed that scene, a story that would later be told as a true example of how the unexpected can, yes, save the day in a way that no one could foresee. Screams echoed through the supermarket as the criminals, in a swift and determined move, drew their weapons and ordered everyone to kneel or hide. The mood of tranquility was instantly replaced by an atmosphere of pure terror. People who until then had been distracted by their purchases began to tremble with fear, seeking refuge behind the shelves, in the darkest corners, or lying on the floor, trying to disappear from that nightmare that set in overnight. The sound of the robbers' voices, steady and menacing, mingled with the noise of hurried footsteps and objects being pushed or knocked over in an attempt to escape the chaos. The feeling of insecurity spread like a heavy shadow, enveloping every customer, every employee. That moment became a real test of emotional endurance, where the priority was to survive the moment. The criminals, without much patience, shouted orders, pointing their weapons in the direction of whoever was in front, forcing everyone to stand still, motionless, like pieces of a macabre game. Noticing someone moving or trying to flee was reason enough for a quick and violent response. The tension reached extreme levels, as if the environment itself was charged with a negative energy, almost palpable. Meanwhile, the swarm of marimbondos, which until then seemed like a threat from a distance, now became a silent but extremely dangerous force. The insects, enraged, began to fly over the environment in an uncontrolled way, attracted by the movement, the smell of blood, or perhaps the disturbance in space. People shuddered at the first sting, the first buzz, and in a few seconds, everything turned into a mess of desperate screams, frantic movement, and attempts to protect themselves. The assailants, who had hoped to achieve what they had planned quickly, now found themselves completely surrounded by an invisible but deadly enemy. The scene turned into a real mixture of panic and despair, where survival became the only priority. Some customers tried to run, others hid behind boxes and shopping carts, while employees tried to remain calm, even with their hearts beating too hard. The feeling of helplessness was almost unbearable, as if trapped in a nightmare with no way out. At this moment, the criminals, surprised by the intensity of the insect attack, began to scream, exchange nervous glances, while trying to protect themselves with their hands or even with improvised clothes. The violence of the swarm was almost surreal, a force of nature that seemed to have been triggered by a combination of unpredictable factors, like a hidden truth that reveals itself only at the right time. The chaos spread, the sound of people crying, hiding and screaming, mixed with the incessant hum of the marimbondos. Fear took over that space, turning the supermarket into a battlefield where the enemy was not only the armed man, but also the wild force of nature. In this scenario of pure tension, every second felt like an eternity, and the hope that everything would soon be over became a desperate urge, almost like an attempt to resist what seemed inevitable. The scene, which seemed like a simple act of robbery, became a war of survival, a battle that no one could predict or control, leaving deep marks on those who were there and showing that sometimes the true transformation happens precisely in the most extreme moments when everything seems to fall apart around us. With confusion and chaos engulfing every corner of the supermarket, the robbers realized that the situation was getting more complicated by the second. Still under the impact of the unexpected attack of the marimbondos, they decided that the best way out would be to escape through the back of the establishment. With bags full of money and stolen valuables, they ran desperately, almost as if it were a race against time. The hope of achieving freedom was soon mixed with anxiety, adrenaline, and fear of being achieved, or that something even worse could happen. They believed at that moment that they were one step away from escaping that nightmare, from resuming their lives, even if momentarily, free from the consequences of the crime. However, fate, always full of surprises and twists, had other plans. While the criminals advanced through the back corridors, the atmosphere was still agitated with the last remnants of the attack of the marimbondos. The insects, which seemed to have momentarily dispersed, were in a kind of silent vigilance, ready to return at any instant. The escape, which seemed like a simple strategy to escape the horror scenario, soon turned out to be more complex than they imagined. With each step, they had to deal with confusion, with the fear of being caught or being bitten by some insect that might be hiding in the shadows. And that's when everything began to turn into a kind of survival game, where the advantage seemed to be on their side, but at any moment it could change direction. The two, carrying heavy bags, tried to maintain a calm posture, while their eyes scanned the route looking for a quick exit. The feeling that they were almost free was mixed with a growing anxiety, because they already knew that what awaited them ahead could be even more unpredictable than everything they had gone through so far. They were sure that if they managed to get through the back, they could hide, disappear into the city, disappear into the crowd. But even with this hope of freedom, one thing was certain: what they hadn't considered was the impact of what had happened in those few minutes. The scene in the supermarket, the attack of the marimbondos, the reaction of the people, all that had left marks that went beyond the physical. The customers, the employees, the people who were around, all had witnessed a situation that defied any logic. A true lesson in how the unpredictable can arise and completely transform the narrative. So while the robbers ran desperately in the direction of the exit, they did not imagine that, in fact, a greater force, a revelation that was yet to come, would put everything to the test. And it is in this moment of high tension, of decision, that the story begins to unfold in an even more surprising way. That moment of flight, which seemed to be the last hope to escape from the chaos, became a kind of turning point, a twist that would defy logic and show that many times the true transformation occurs precisely in those moments when we think we are closer to an end. The criminals, carrying the bags, took the path they believed to be the safest, but the feeling that something bigger was about to happen began to spread, carrying with it a revelation that would change everything. And as they approached the exit, a shadow, a barely perceptible movement began to form in their direction, as if the universe was preparing for an impact that no one could predict. In that moment of escape, with their hearts pounding and adrenaline dominating every muscle of their bodies, the criminals believed they were almost free of the chaos they had created. The fear of being captured or attacked seemed to subside as they focused on hoping to escape with what they had stolen. But in the midst of that desperate rush, a fatal mistake revealed itself, a decision that would change everything abruptly and dramatically. When they ran through the back of the supermarket, one of them, while trying to avoid obstacles and keep pace, ended up touching an old crate stacked in the warehouse without realizing what was inside. The impact was stronger than they expected. The noise of the crate falling and rolling across the floor was enough to arouse a terrifying and unexpected reaction. Since they were placed there a long time ago, the forgotten objects of that deposit, including a nest of marimbondos, remained hidden in silence, waiting for the right moment to manifest. And that noise, that sudden movement, was the spark that ignited a real delayed-effect bomb. The sound echoed throughout the space like a siren of danger that no one had noticed until then. It was as if a secret door had opened to reveal an ancient secret, an impact that seemed to come from a horror film, but that, in fact, was an almost forgotten reality. The marimbondos, who had hitherto slept in their hiding place, were awakened by this sudden movement. Like a gigantic mass of enraged creatures, they came out from inside the crate, forming a swarm that seemed to have come out of a nightmare. The deafening hum spread rapidly, filling the environment with an energy of destruction and menace. What was once a simple repository of forgotten objects has become a stage of pure transformation, a true revelation of the impact of negligence and human error. From that moment on, the scene turned into a real battle between man and nature. The assailants, who were just steps away from escaping, saw their escape turn into a struggle for survival. Insects, guided by the instinct of defense, began to attack fiercely, biting and buzzing incessantly. The movement of the marimbondos was almost hypnotic, an invisible force that materialized in a shower of stings and deafening buzzing. Thus, what seemed like a quick and smart decision to flee turned into a deadly trap, a moment of impact that showed the hidden truth behind reckless actions. Every second of that moment felt like an eternity. The criminals, surprised by the sudden attack, tried to protect themselves with their hands, shaking their bodies to disperse the insects, but the amount of marimbondos was overwhelming. It was as if the environment had become a war arena, where the very force of nature decided to intervene definitively. The screams of pain and despair mingled with the sound of incessant buzzing, creating a symphony of chaos that seemed to have no end. The scene, which until then seemed like a quick escape, turned into a real struggle of resistance, where the impact of that mistake would become a deep mark in the memory of everyone who was there. And as the criminals desperately tried to escape, the force of the universe seemed to be aligned, to show that not everything can be planned or controlled. Most surprising of all was that this moment of extreme chaos had a seemingly simple origin, an action that seemed insignificant in the daily routine of the supermarket. But the discovery of that hidden nest in the warehouse revealed that the impact of one detail can be devastating, changing the entire narrative in ways no one could have imagined. This revelation, a true lesson that everything is connected by an invisible web of causes and effects, sets the stage for what is yet to come, a transformation that goes beyond superficial understanding. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject, because what happened that day has roots that extend beyond the obvious, revealing hidden truths that can teach us a lot about our decisions and about the silent power that life has to surprise us when we least expect it. The moment the crate fell was like a spark that ignited a veritable explosion of chaos. The swarm, which until then had seemed a silent and contained threat, emerged from within that hiding place relentlessly, spreading through the warehouse with an almost human fury. The wings of the marimbondos flapped at a frightening speed, forming a dark mass that invaded corridors, pushing everything around with a force that seemed unearthly. Each buzzing sounded like a warning that the threat had become an uncontrollable force, a storm of angry insects that spared no one. The criminals, who until a few seconds before had been focused on their escape, saw everything slip out of control in a way that even they could not imagine. Desperation took over, and the fear of being attacked or of being trapped in the midst of that mass of insects dominated their actions. They dropped their weapons, which fell to the ground with a metallic sound, and began to run as if their lives depended on it. Their steps were uncoordinated, almost pathetic, as they tried to dodge the voracious attacks of the swarm. The sound of screams frightened people, and objects being dropped mixed with the incessant buzzing, creating a symphony of terror that seemed to have no end. Customers and employees, stunned at the surreal scene, screamed in horror. Some people hid behind shelves, others tried to protect themselves with their hands or anything they could find. The impact of that natural attack was like an invisible force that turned the supermarket into a battlefield. Each movement of the insects seemed to determine who would escape and who would stay there, the victim of a greater force, a force that could not be controlled or predicted. It was as if nature itself had decided to show itself at that moment, and the feeling of powerlessness hung in the air, charged with an energy of destruction and fear. What seemed like an ordinary robbery situation turned into a horror movie scene, where fear was mixed with the uncertainty of who would survive. The customers who were on the scene some wide-eyed, others crying or shaking with fright, felt on their skin the impact of a force that they could not fully understand. People clung to the last hopes that it would soon pass, that the strength of the insects would disperse. But what was seen was a battle of resistance against what seemed a real, natural invasion, an invasion that showed no signs of stopping. Even the calmest, those who usually remain calm in any situation, felt enveloped by a sense of dread. The screams and hum formed a kind of soundtrack to a collective nightmare, where each attempt to escape seemed more difficult than the previous one. The criminals, who had entered with the intention of stealing, were now completely overwhelmed by the chaos they created. Their movements, once coordinated, became disorganized, confused, as they tried to flee from the relentless onslaught. The scene became a real demonstration of how the force of nature, when awakened unexpectedly, can turn any situation into something that defies all logic. And there, in that instant, it became clear that the impact of a wrong decision, an oversight, or even negligence had the potential to trigger a chain of unpredictable events. The attack of the marimbondos was not only a defensive reaction, but a revelation of a hidden truth, that nature always finds a way to impose itself, to defend itself. And on that day, she chose to show her strength in a way that no one could have predicted, transforming that supermarket into a scene of apocalyptic chaos, a scene that would be marked in the memory of everyone who witnessed that silent battle, where the invisible and the unpredictable came together to create one of the greatest surprises of that moment. In a matter of seconds, what was once an ordinary robbery operation turned into a scene of pure nightmare. The supermarket turned into a scene of war, where nature itself decided to intervene brutally and unexpectedly. Shopping bags flew through the air, some torn, dropping food, clothes, and various objects on the floor. Products of all colors and sizes were scattered on the knocked-down shelves, forming a real visual chaos. Paper packaging, cereal boxes, soda bottles, everything was mixed in a flood of colors, sounds, and smells that intensified that apocalyptic atmosphere. Customers and employees ran in all directions, trying to escape the fury of the marimbondos, who attacked with unparalleled ferocity. People pushed each other, stumbled, slipped, while screams of terror spread throughout the environment. Some tried to hide behind the gondolas, others jumped over the boxes, desperate for a refuge that could protect them from that overwhelming attack. The assailants, who until then had seemed confident and determined, were now completely cowed, surrounded by a cloud of enraged insects that seemed to give no respite. Their movements were frantic, trying to dodge the bites, while fear took over each of them, turning the scene into a real battle of survival. It was a scene of almost cinematic destruction, as if an invisible force had decided to destroy everything there without distinction. The screams of the people mingled with the incessant buzzing, creating a symphony of horror that seemed not to end. The robbers, who had previously been in control of the situation, were now being swallowed by a mass of insects that attacked them from all sides as a revenge of nature itself. The chaotic movement, the desperate people, the products scattered on the floor, everything seemed like a kind of miniature apocalypse, a battle of antagonistic forces that faced each other mercilessly. The impact was so strong that it seemed to defy all logic. How did a simple act of robbery turn into a scene of mass destruction? How did a situation of human conflict turn into a struggle against such a wild natural force? These questions echoed in the heads of those watching, as the scenery became increasingly surreal. The glint in some customers' eyes faded in the face of fear, while others tried to maintain a faint hope that it would soon pass. But everything indicated that the force of the universe, represented by that swarm of marimbondos, had the force of an earthquake, capable of overthrowing any plane, any intention of escape or action. That afternoon became a kind of brutal lesson that as much as we try to control our actions and decisions, there are forces that completely escape our understanding. The impact of that moment showed that life is a journey of ups and downs, of moments when nature decides to show its true face. And in that moment, she decided to do it in a way that no one could have predicted, turning the supermarket into a war scene where fear, confusion, and destruction mixed in an explosion of emotions. Every speck of dust, every piece of destroyed product seemed to bear the imprint of a hidden truth, that life is unpredictable, that the forces that surround us are greater than we can imagine, and that often, what seems to be the end of a story is only the beginning of a deeper revelation. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject because this scene, as absurd as it may seem at first glance, reveals a universal truth about transformation and resistance. The strength of marimbondos, destruction, fear, all this works as a metaphor for an inner journey, where our own decisions can trigger reactions that change everything around us. Just as the chaos in the supermarket was caused by a small mistake, in our life many times, a choice or a negligence can open doors to impacts that we never imagined, revealing what was hidden under the surface. The truth hidden there is that often it is in adversity that we discover our true strength, our ability to resist and reinvent ourselves. And as we look at that scene of devastation, we realize that transformation is not only something that happens outside, but also within each of us, in the way we react to the crises, losses, and surprises that life brings us. This reflection leads us to understand that everything in our journey has a greater impact than we can imagine, and that the decisions we make today can turn into eternal lessons tomorrow. The impact of that day at the grocery store, as extreme as it sounds, is a reminder that the universe has a way of testing us, often with a scenario that looks like destruction, but is actually an opportunity for growth. The strength of the marimbondos, which initially seemed a threat, eventually became a kind of symbol of resistance, a revelation that even in the most difficult situations, there is an opportunity for transformation and rebirth. And as we reflect on all this, it becomes clear that the true journey is not only in what happens outside, but above all, in what happens inside us, in our ability to learn, to resist, and to move forward, even when everything seems to fall apart around us. After that chaos that seemed to have no end, everything seemed to move at an accelerated speed, almost as if the universe was conspiring for everything to be solved once and for all. The buzzing of insects began to slowly subside as the first movements of the police forces became noticeable. It didn't take long for sirens to cut through the tense silence of that environment of destruction, bringing a sense of hope, but also inevitability. The agents arrived quickly, surrounding the place with their vehicles, equipment, and a determination that seemed charged with a greater mission than the simple capture of criminals. As they entered the supermarket, they came across a scene that looked like something out of an action movie. The floor was covered with pieces of packaging, scattered food, iron marks everywhere, and a heavy silence that contrasted with the earlier tumult. The two robbers, totally exhausted, dirty with sweat, with marks of stings and scratches all over their bodies, were cornered, without many options for escape. Their faces showed a mixture of fear, fatigue, and the clear understanding that, despite all the attempt to escape, the outcome was already inevitable. The police acted precisely, approaching them unhurriedly, with an authority that did not admit of resistance. The weapons, abandoned on the ground, were picked up by the officers as they placed them upside down, handcuffing those who, a few minutes earlier, had seemed so confident in their impunity. The capture scene was quick, almost like a natural conclusion to a chain of events that seemed to have been written by fate itself. The agents, attentive to every detail, recorded the marks and injuries on the bodies of the criminals, which reflected all the intensity of that unusual confrontation. In that moment, everything became a kind of symbol that no matter how much we try to plan or hide our vulnerability, the impact of our actions always leaves marks. The force of nature, the unforeseen, and even our own choices can put us in a position of fragility, and life, with its silent wisdom, usually shows us this definitively. The police officers, in arresting the two, fulfilled their role but also confirmed that justice somehow always finds a way. The city, which followed everything closely, soon became news, and that story of chaos, natural attack, and capture became a kind of backstage of a great lesson in resistance. What remains of that day is the certainty that even in the most unlikely situations, the outcome is guided by a force that we cannot completely control. The capture of the robbers was not just a matter of order, but a confirmation that every action has a consequence, and that the force of the universe often works behind the scenes, putting everything in its place. The impact of that moment was not down to the marks on bodies or the images that swirled the networks, but to the deeper message that in the end, justice prevails, and that hope should never be discarded, even when all seems lost. And as the officers led the criminals to the car, a momentary silence engulfed the supermarket, which slowly began to transform from a stage of destruction to a symbol of resistance and recovery. The scene, which seemed destined to be marked as a tragedy, now carried a new essence, the certainty that, even in the face of chaos, there is a greater force that works to restore balance, and that justice, in one way or another, always finds its way. Thus, that story ended with a lesson that, as much as life surprises us with unexpected challenges, there is always a chance to start over, to rebuild, and to move forward with the certainty that the good, in the end, always prevails. Now I want to go even deeper into this subject, because this story reveals to us a hidden truth that we often go unnoticed in the rush of everyday life. The impact that our actions, however minor they may seem, can trigger a chain of unpredictable events. That day at the supermarket was a lesson in how simple negligence or a mistake can open doors to reactions we never imagined. What seemed like an isolated act, a quick robbery attempt, eventually turned into a battle against a force that is not easily controlled, the force of nature, which often works behind the scenes, silent but devastating. It makes us reflect on our own journey. Every decision we make, every choice we make, carries with it a consequence that can multiply in ways we can't always foresee. Often, our mentality of excessive control makes us forget that we are inserted in a larger system, where external factors, the impact of our actions, and even chance, have a fundamental role in the history we are living. It's as if every step we take is connected to an invisible network of causes and effects, and understanding this workings helps us see beyond the obvious. After all, life is a constant transformation, and our ability to learn from the unforeseen is what really reveals our inner strength. The impact of that episode was not just the capture of the criminals or the momentary fright, but a deeper reflection on our own vulnerability in the face of greater forces. The discovery of the nest of marimbondos hidden in the deposit shows us that many times, what is hidden under the surface can reveal itself in an explosive way, completely changing the script of a story that seemed to be already written. This revelation reminds us that there are truths that remain hidden until the right moment to come to light, and that our journey is marked by these constant revelations. They are the ones who challenge us to see beyond appearances, to understand that the impact of our actions goes far beyond what we can imagine at the time. Along the way, we learn that the most important decisions often happen in the moments of greatest silence, of greatest inner reflection. It is in these moments that we can transform a situation of chaos into an opportunity for growth, for resistance. The strength of the marimbondos, as frightening as it may seem, also teaches us that there is a strength of resistance within each of us, which arises precisely in the most difficult moments. Thus, this story becomes a symbol that every crisis brings with it an opportunity for transformation, a chance to rebuild ourselves, to learn to deal with what we cannot control, and to discover our true essence. And as we reflect on all this, it becomes clear that the most profound impact is not in the destruction itself, but in our ability to see beyond the immediate episode. What really matters is how we react to situations that seem to bring us down, how we use our experiences to strengthen ourselves. Resilience, courage, and hope are the ingredients that shape who we are, even in the face of the most unexpected adversities. After all, life is a journey of constant discovery, where the greatest revelations are often accompanied by moments of crisis. And it is precisely in these hours that we can discover our true strength, our capacity for transformation, even when everything seems to fall apart around us. So as we look at that story, we realize that it is not just an isolated episode, but a powerful metaphor that all change begins within us. The impact of that day, which became a legend, shows us that even in the most extreme situations, there is an opportunity for learning, growth, and evolution. True transformation happens when we manage to transform chaos into an opportunity for renewal, for resilience, for a new understanding about the world and about ourselves. And as we reflect on this journey, we can realize that the most lasting impact is the one that makes us rethink our own attitudes, our decisions, and our priorities. Comment there. This makes sense to me. Or write a word that represents your perception of what this story has awakened in you. After all, everyone's journey is unique, and the reflection that comes from these stories can open doors to a new mindset, a new way of seeing the impact of our actions on our lives and the world around us. If you made it this far, I want to thank you for following this story to the end. I think it reminds us of one important thing, that no matter how hard we try to plan everything, life always has surprises in store that can change the course of things from one hour to the next. These moments of chaos, of unpredictability, teach us to value our capacity for resistance and adaptation. So if this message made sense to you, here is my invitation to continue exploring stories like this, which reveal the power of surprise and the strength we have within us to overcome any challenge. If you have not yet subscribed to the channel, here's a tip. Here we always try to bring content that helps you reflect to see beyond the obvious in a light and true way. Your support makes all the difference so that we can continue to bring this type of reflection and news. Oh, and leave a comment saying, "I'm with you until the end," or share what this story has awakened in you. It's always good to know that the message has reached someone who also seeks to learn from the unexpected. There is a video here on the side that complements this subject. Click and continue with me there, so we can move forward together, exploring more stories that make us think, understand, and grow. I hope to see you in the next one, because here the chat is always in a natural way with content that makes sense in our life. Until then.